would be an understatement to say that 2020 has been a hell of a year, both inside and outside the game of Magic. And with such a polarising journey for the world's greatest card game, picking out the highs and lows has been at times both easy and nuanced. So where did we land on this packed year, and what events and developments stood out to us as pivotal for the game? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast. We talk about all things Magic flavour, design and lore. It's your boy, Andy Man.
What's up? This is NC Cancel. That's not my initials. Fuck! Good start to the episode.
What I thought I'd do for our last episode of the year is to maybe shake up our personas a little bit, and immediately I hate it.
You took me so off guard. You took me off guard so much I forgot my name.
For those of you that don't know what our record process is, basically what happens is we hit record, me and Nathan natter for about 7 to 8 minutes about just general life, and then we just jump into it and go. And yeah, I do try and trip you up from time to time, and today it's worked. But I genuinely was like, I wonder if I'll just try doing, because at the end, we've done 53 episodes now, and I've said that sentence the same way for about 50 of them. Every once in a while, I think, maybe I'll try a different cadence or a different way of opening up. Nah.
Yeah, it's a time when you went, and I was like, what the fuck is he doing? This isn't how we start the episode. You can't break the norm. Anyway, good, amazing. Hello, everybody. How are we doing?
You know what? It segues quite nicely into what we're talking about today, about looking back over the year and how things have progressed and how things have developed and breaking the norm in better or worse ways. Today, we're going to be talking about the year 2020 for Magic the Gathering and the highs and the lows. And I mean, I think we should just probably sidestep outside of Magic the Gathering year 2020 highs and lows, because we all know what's been going on there. But I don't know really if Magic's been any less polarizing or controversial compared to just absolutely everything else as well. It seems to have gone, if not informed by, but definitely hand in hand with just the world at the moment.
2020's been a fucking doozy. In everything, it's just been a doozy.
It's been a real test, right? And do you know what? Magic, as I say, has been absolutely no different. This year has seen some of the most pivotal push forwards and innovations and some of the most regressive pullbacks and shitstorms. I'm just going to say, I mean, yeah, we're going to do two thirds good, 1/3 bad today, because I know there are other content creators and stuff. There's lots of people doing years in review from their own different slants and skews, and some people will dedicate whole episodes to the good and the bad, and some people will focus on one or the other. But I sort of think it's worth remembering, with the 2/3 good, 1/3 bad, I think it's worth remembering that there's been a lot of good this year, and the bad stuff is really bad, but the good stuff has been also really, really good. So that's what I kind of want to talk about today. There are lots of stuff that's been going on in Magic as well that aren't necessarily from our sort of slant and our skew, but we can't ignore them. So as ever in this podcast, it's in our name, Magic the Flavouring, we always try to talk about things from a flavour perspective, from the art, the abilities to storytelling, the narrative design, the flavour text, all these kinds of things that make this an artistic endeavour, as opposed to one that's maybe about corporate issues or about professional play. And obviously all these things inform each other, and that's the beauty of this game. So I think it's worth remembering that there's been lots going on that are probably a lot worse and a lot better than the things we talk about in this episode today. If we say that something is the worst of the year 2020 in regards to, we didn't like an artwork or something about the story, it is absolutely not the worst thing that happened to Magic this year within the larger context of the game. And I don't want to basically have us sit here and go, I didn't like this, and then we forget about all of the racial, gender, sexuality inequalities that's been going on in the game this year, also things to do with corporate greed, pricing structures, internal power struggles at the company.
It doesn't sound great when you list it out, does it? It doesn't sound great.
I suppose in a morbid way, a lot of it has been to do with the flavour of this game. We can't skirt around the fact that this year Magic shit-canned two of its most prominent artists in Noah Bradley and Therese Nielsen officially. Those issues, weirdly enough, the things that were really egregious about this year, you can kind of see it in two different lights. It's the kind of thing of where the game went through, especially with things like the advent of Black Lives Matter and a big push for gender and sort of sexual identity equality and equity in the game. These aren't issues that just happened this year. I think this is my point that I'm trying to get to. They're not things that just went, well, 2020, it started and ended in 2020. Not only will it not end in 2020, and these will be issues and things that will be developed and worked on and analysed and picked apart and fought for years and years to come. The issues didn't start in 2020 either. These have been ingrained things for a long time. So as much as I suppose we could say it's terrible this year that 2020, the worst thing that happened to Magic were that these artists turned out to be complete arseholes. And the best thing of 2020 is that Wizards actually grew a backbone and took some action against them eventually, after much lobbying and after much like people sort of saying, like, you need to look at your artists and the way that they conduct themselves. Really, it's not a 2020 issue. This is just an issue in the game on large. And the same with when, I mean, God, just looking back at, there's so much to look back on, like all the cards that got outright banned and pretty much disowned by WotC because of the advent of Black Lives Matter movement. Those cards weren't printed this year. Nope. They've always been an issue.
And they even said they were going to go back and reevaluate, and they never had. That was one of those things that I felt like that was the Wizards' first obvious slant at, we're trying to make everyone happy, but we're being very transparent about how opaque it is. So yeah, I think it's been. I think they've realised, obviously, with this year, and this has been a year of you're allowed to air your opinions and you say lobby most subject matters to the public and have them kind of dictate what is and isn't right. Because I feel like that should be how democratic opinion should be. You know, there should be a consensus of what is acceptable and not acceptable. Obviously, this can form issues, but Wizards has been held up for it now, and for their own a lot of fashions they've done good. But I think that was the first time I saw them go, oh, we're going to pretend that we're listening to you, but as long as it doesn't hurt. Because did they ban any cards that are worth a lot of money that are, not really? Not really. I mean, I'm not saying that Ristic Studies being a popular and expensive card made much difference as to why they took a while to do something with Therese Nielsen, but there was a slight transparency there where you could see as a company, you're like, oh, maybe I don't believe in your philosophies. Even when you're trying to do good, it makes you look bad.
And it is interesting, especially with things like artworks where they're either it's art by artists that maybe have proven themselves to not be representative of the game or the kind of people that we want working on the game, but also artworks and sort of art directions which people have kind of gone, maybe you're still just hitting a bit of a deaf tone. If you haven't noticed, by the way, this is what we think is maybe the lower end of the year, the flavor lows of the year. These definitely aren't the flavor highs. Like even as recent as Commander Legends, we've had artworks for legendary creatures which people have kind of thought maybe are a bit tonally deaf to certain cultures, or maybe are appropriation not of like the most egregious level that we need to shut the game down, especially not compared to some of the issues flagged up during the advent and height of Black Lives Matter, but just are continually proving to be like, look, we need to be better as a game. Art direction needs to be better. Money from the top needs to be put in places which are actually progressive and not just about boosting sales every left, right, and centre.
There's still obvious ignorance being on display, and that's not a bad thing if you tackle it and you handle it in the moment. It is a bad thing if you ignore it.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a difference between realising, I guess, that some individuals are maybe malicious is not the wrong word, but are wantonly sort of tone deaf in their approach versus things which are maybe just, look, we know you weren't trying to be arseholes with what you were trying to do here. However, this does affect people in a certain way, and you need to kind of like be better as a company. And one of the better things of this year is that at least on surface level, which is enough to hold them accountable to it in the future, at least on a surface level, Wizards of the Coast have tried to move themselves in a direction, maybe as a response to this year as a whole, and all these issues kind of come up to the surface this year, are trying to hold themselves up to that higher degree. The recent statements that they released about pushing story forward in a way that they want to tell the stories they want to tell regardless of regional or national restrictions in other countries. I mean, read that however you will. A lot of people took it to mean that the storylines involving non-heterosexual normative characters in countries where not being heterosexual is punishable crime, or in some countries punishable by death, which is a horrific like slant against our entire race, let alone, our silly little card game. Some people have seen that as being quite a sort of hard step forward. Other people have seen it as being just a bit of a corporate soundbite that they can use to be like, hey, we are trying to fix things. Look at our statement that we made last year. And really the proof will be in the pudding, as it is always.
Yeah. At least they're making that statement. Exactly.
They're making a statement which people will have to hold them accountable to.
Exactly.
And that's more than a lot of companies will give you. So, yes.
Precisely. I think it's obviously difficult for them because they've obviously got a lot of eyes on them in various directions. And there was obviously a big push because they lost what Hasbro lost out Toys R Us, and they had this big hole financially. This is something we'll probably come on to with other things as we're talking. But this need to make up that financial loss. Probably they feel a lot of pressure in making sure not only is the product going out, but the message they're sending out is good. And obviously public opinion, as I've said, this year has been much more obvious and much more vocal. And the easiest way to solve these problems is to set these buffers out, but then also to employ the people within the company that will ensure these things are followed through on. It's very easy to say, to have an empathetic opinion about other things, but it's very difficult to understand them unless you involve people that are integrated into those parts of society, into those groups, into those demographics. And I think that's going to be the big push over the next couple of years, if they do integrate people to allow them to do this in a way that works, or if they're just going to still be a bunch of like people of nameless faces saying things without meaning and without any backup. So that'll be an interesting thing to see over the next year or so. It's good that they're making these statements, though, and they are drawing a line.
100%.
I don't think it's too little too late. I just think it needs to be the beginning of a movement, not the final statement.
100%. I mean, Wizards as a company, or at least Magic the Gathering as a company, as a sort of subsidiary of Wizards of the Coast, compared to any other game ever in any sphere, whether it's video games or card games or board games or whatever, has an unprecedented front-facing sort of presence. You look at, if you mention names Gavin Verhey, Mark Rosewater, Cynthia Shepherd, Ethan Fleischer, like these people call to mind, the company, whether they even work, some of them don't even work for the company anymore, but you recognize them as being these front-facing sort of public engaging figures of the company. And, whether that's to their betterment or their detriment when they get shit thrown at them for stuff that's not their fault. No other game does this. And so you can argue that really Wizards already does way more in terms of public engagement and public reassurance than anyone else. The problem is that, as you say, these things ring hollow unless they're acted upon. So hopefully they will continue pushing forwards and continue innovating in this area and actually, fix the problems that they say, that they claim to know are problems themselves. Only time will tell. So these things aren't necessarily on our list of flavor highs and lows of the year, but I just thought it was you can't mention the year of 2020 and Magic the Gathering without looking back and going, holy shit, there was a lot of stuff that went on this year. And nothing that we say in this list, especially in the things that we're upset about, even come close to actually being as important as some of the bigger stuff in the year. But we like to focus on some of the more aesthetic aspects of the game, I suppose. And there are things that on a ground level, on a base level of engaging with this game as a narrative device or as an artistic hobby, there are also things that went wrong this year, as well as the company at large, I suppose. God, it's an exhausting. 2020 has been exhausting, mate.
This is going to be something we'll probably tail off the episode with. But it has been a long year. Surprisingly, for having more time on my hands, it's felt like I've had less time to appreciate things and sit on things. I don't know. My day-to-day life has become more open, but my minute to minute is way more occupied with opinion. It's been tough. It's been tough to kind of finish off feeling light and airy, which is my general disposition. I feel, as you say, quite heavy. It's been a very dense year.
It has been a dense year. And all right, so let's move out then. So moving past all of the actually important, horrible shit that happened this year, what's some of the stuff that you've kind of felt within your engagement of the hobby and kind of what you expected from this year, especially seeing the sets and the products that were going to be released this year? What were some of the flavor misses and some of the kind of aesthetic misses that you thought that the game just didn't really live up to this year?
So this is how I kind of came across my main downfall of this year, and that's that I looked across the entire year of all the different sets that came out, everything that got released, not this September just gone, but last September before, when they gave that prospected year out, and they gave us Theros Beyond Death, Ikoria, the core set, and Zendikar Rising, and it looked like it was going to be an amazing year going forwards. The thing I think that really slipped up this year from a aesthetic story point of view, is that Theros Beyond Death, the kick off to the year, which got released 21st of January or whatever, all those months and months and months ago, severely lacked in resonance, in story resonance, and I feel like this kind of keyed the rest of the year off like kind of poorly, because it set an expectation for the rest of the year that things weren't going to be living up to the expectation that we had. The problem with Theros Beyond Death is it came off the back of the War of the Spark debacle, we shall call it. In terms of story, that was not handled in a way that people liked. There was a general feeling of unhappiness, and I feel like Theros Beyond Death probably suffered from this the most, specifically because it's the only set that I know of that they actually pulled the story from. And I think this, regardless of whether or not that story was going to be like as bad as Forsaken and War of the Spark, or as good as say the Unstandard Bond, I think pulling a story that late into a set's creation and exposure to the audience is a horrific idea, and I've got a litany of reasons as to why this happened. But I think that for me was the biggest failure, is that they kicked off the year with a set that was essentially lacked any kind of resonance, so the rest of the year's products kind of had a feeling of, are they not going to do it justice? Is it not going to go so well? And that's not what you want. You want the year going forward to be full of confidence. You want your audience to be like, hell yeah, that's how you start the year. Let's go. And I'm going to say from my point of view, the end of the year, this has been an amazing year for Magic products, and I'm exceptionally happy. Looking back, and finally at the beginning of Theros, I even thought maybe it was end of 2019, and kind of wished it was, because looking at it in terms of this year, I do feel like it was the beginning of bad feelings that they thankfully got rid of by the end of the year. But for me, that was a bad start to the year.
I mean, interestingly, when we didn't talk about like what we were going to pick as our kind of highs and lows across the year, and for me, the biggest low, if we're looking at a flavor thing for how the game was affected as a narrative storytelling device, the big loss of this year, I agree with you 100%. My one was the Theros Beyond Death storyline just being completely cat-handed. As you say, there was a story that got pulled, and the rumor is that it wasn't just a blowback after the War of the Spark and the War of the Spark Forsaken novels, because that was the official kind of line that a lot of the narrative leads kind of put out there, was like, oh, well, after the blowback of all this, we wanted to vetting was the word that kind of got banded around. Whereas the hard rumor that was never fully confirmed or really denied by anyone was that it was going to be another Greg Weisman novel. So they got him to do a multi-book deal, and that he was going to be one of the driving forces across the year for some of the ebooks that were going to kind of happen. And the fact that after the two War of the Spark novels, they couldn't have him do another one. So there is the rumor that somewhere in the WotC vaults there is a fully formed book for the Theros story that is waiting to be released, but never will be, because people would just be like, this guy again? Absolutely no way. So yeah, there's like, that's the rumor, at least. I don't know how like true that is, but there was definitely notes and definitely admissions by WotC that there is a larger Theros story that they did try to put out on those lore slides that they did. This was like the kind of the advent of the lore slides, the misrepresented lore slides that didn't tell the story correctly. And I mean, there were so many big characters in Theros to wrap up. Not only to wrap up the Elsipith sort of story arc on that plane and the Daxos story arc on that plane, there was also things like the new Planeswalker Calyx and the new god. They had a whole new god that was like born that they didn't touch at all, like really in the storyline. There was whole things with Titans and the uprising of the underworld and like the fights between the gods. All these massive story threads that not only didn't get none of them really got chased up either in sort of a narrative form. They got barely elucidated on those fucking lore slides, and then the cards were, I mean, as much like with sets like Theros and things like Amonkhet, for example, and the upcoming Kaldheim sets, all those ones that are based on real world mythologies and sort of pantheons of gods and stuff, you can almost forgive them for not having a Magic the Gathering narrative, because really you're just looking for those signifiers to like, oh, what's the Zeus card going to be? What's the Thor card going to be? Etc., etc. And you could be forgiven or you could forgive them for basically only having those signifiers and then loosely putting a story on. That would be fine, I guess. But they didn't do that in the Last Theros set. They had a book for the Last Theros set because the web fiction wasn't something that was really a thing back last time we went to Theros. They had books. So where's our fucking story? Like, it's just not there.
Significantly more story with the original Theros set. Yes, they had three sets to do this with. But looking as you say, there were three massive story arcs in here. One, Elspeth coming back from the death, which is clearly the focus of why they went back there. For what reason? We don't fucking know. We're probably not going to find out for another year and a half as to why they needed Elspeth back in the story so badly. That's also ignoring the fact that Ashiok has something to do with that in the background, ignoring that side of it. The funny thing I find is that because it was an Elspeth set, obviously all the story spotlight cards were based on her. Now, if you look at the four story spotlight cards: Agonizing Remorse, Triumphant Surge, Relentless Pursuit, Helios Punishment. What I've written is Elspeth Sad, Elspeth Mad, Elspeth Run, Elspeth Won. Because that's basically all it is, and that's all you need to know. But there's no like, even with the, as you say, the Daxos hint in the first one, they don't have any expansion on that. There are titans that were released that are older than the gods, and that never explored, never explained. Only two of them. One of them broke the format. Fantastic, good job. There's a gods war with demigods going on in the background here. Again, who cares? And then one of the most biggest things: not only has a god created a planeswalker, but we have no idea how she made him or how he became a planeswalker. Now, that's absurd.
The changing of the metaphysics of what can even be a planeswalker. You're right. I didn't even mention Ashiok when I was doing my little rant about it. Ashiok's still there in the background. The demigods... Not only are the demigods a thing, but some of them, a couple of them are returning characters, which we only saw on flavor text, which is very kind of cool, like Caliphate. But also... two of them are characters that we did have cards for. Three of them, sorry, that are characters that we did have cards for, came back in this new demigod form with no real explanation as to how they're suddenly now demigods.
How is Daxos not returned anymore? Like, all these questions that would have an amazing... This is kind of why we would have been excited initially to go there, because we get more hint of the underworld, how the underworld works, how it integrates with the story. And I think we beat this to death when we talked about it originally. But the fact that they weren't able to decide on whether they wanted to concentrate on the mortal realm and everything that was going on there, or on the underworld realm, the fact that the set kind of didn't even seem to have diversity between these two, and you couldn't really tell the cards apart sometimes. Like, is a Dryad of Elysium Grove in regular Theros or in Nyx? Like, all of this inconsistency is because there was no definement whatsoever. Like, what I've put is that none of the story was cohesive or defined, leaving everything in this weird gully in the middle, this weird puddle of going, well, how do we highlight these different things? Like, is Crocs a cool dude who this eternal hungering titan? Doesn't matter, don't know, don't care. Like, that's absurd. I mean, Uro, for all that he's worth in terms of being strong cards, because this is the thing, Theros did release some ridiculously strong cards between Thassa's Oracle, Uro, Underworld Breach, even something like Woe Strider. Like, they printed some really powerful cards that affected formats, like across formats. Good.
I mean, it's interesting. I didn't even mention that again in the start of the episode when we were running down all the external things in Magic that almost completely broke the game. The fact that we've had more bannings than any other period of Magic, and cards that have literally ruined formats. Yeah,
and arguably people wanted these wanted, or most of the bannings that happened, people wanted them to happen earlier. Normally it's like, why are you banning things? Don't ban things. For this, everyone was outcrying, why aren't you banning these cards? Why aren't you banning your premier mythic cards that are worth the most money in this? Oh, right. Okay, good job, Wizards. It's a self-answering question. And it's funny that this is the kind of thing that they ended up focusing on, because this is a perfect example of where you have a really cool set, with a returning set, a fan favorite set, and everything's just kind of left as a grey sludge because the story side of it isn't fleshed out, isn't recompensed. Okay, you took a book away, fine. Then decide. I guess at this point it's too late. You've got everything in the set and you can't necessarily explain all of it, but I don't know, maybe then expand on Elspeth's... Oh wait, they did expand on Elspeth's story, didn't they? They gave like a little tiny blurby thing, and at the end of it, it was Calix wanted to planeswalk and did, and that was your extrapolation on it. Like, if that is so this frustration, I think, is because it was a set, as I say, that people wanted to go back to, they wanted to understand more about, but not only was the story flaccid, but there was no real expansion on the lore of the set, of the plane, and everything within the plane that was expanded without explanation. So from a Vorthos side, we kind of still don't know much more about Theros. It's a lot messier, it's a lot muddier. We don't really necessarily know what going back to. Heliod's trapped under a blind, he's what's his name, Atlas now. Does it matter?
Yeah.
Not really. You know, whatever. The gravity of last set where he turned around and killed Elspeth after she fucking decided Xenagos. What a triumphant end to the set, and this is what we got left with.
Yeah.
Even the advert for the trailer for it showed such a depth to her emotion, and we get nothing.
Oh my gosh. The trailer seemed to have so much going on for storylines that just never existed otherwise. In the trailer, if you remember, Ashiok is doing the Dreamweavery stuff. I mean, it's a little bit vague still, but doing some Dreamweaver magic on Elspeth. Elspeth sees herself as a child who then turns around with a zombie face, which is unusual on Theros because the zombie faces are hidden behind the return masks. She's in the underworld, in the big sort of sea, which you kind of forget yourself in. And there's all these different things. None of it, not a single thread was picked up on. Not a single one. They went in a completely different direction. And the team who did the trailer must have had access to the most up-to-date story threads. So they must have... It can't just be that they went and they did their own thing. Or if they did do their own thing, how was it not the greater sort of narrative design or the people who are in charge of making sure it's all coherent, if there's anyone in charge of making sure it's all coherent, because that's another issue for this year. Who didn't go to the trailer team and go, oh, by the way, could you include something about the fact that the gods are warring with each other, or the fact there's a new god, or the fact that there's titans? Can you put something in? No one told them.
Yeah, I felt like two different sets.
When they put that trailer, when they finally showed that trailer to the WotC board, did no one stick up their hand and go, oh, sorry, did we not tell you actually what the set was about? I don't blame the trailer team at all.
I not at all. I think they did too good a job. The problem is because I think the set definitely had a failing in that it wanted to focus on this Ashiok Elspeth aspect, which it would have been amazing because it finishes the story arc kind of finished off with Ashiok not learning about the Phyrexians from going into Artis Mine and going, oh, that's interesting, let's go off, because that was an interesting point as well. Ashiok fucking off at the end to go and integrate with the Phyrexians. That's really cool. But they also then had, like you say, this whole other side, this whole demigod warring on the mortal realm, which never really came to anything. So all of the interventions, all of the demigod cards, they all kind of just feel kind of meh. The two Titans were cool, and you're like, great, but because you don't get anything about them, they're kind of meh. The Planeswalkers were, okay, yeah, fair enough, they've got some gravity, but none of them really do anything in the set, so they're all kind of meh. And the whole set just eventually feels a little bit meh. And as an escape mechanic being their premier mechanic for the set, all I wanted to do was escape from the set. So I guess that was one of the few things that actually resonated.
It's so funny, talking about Clothis and who's the green red god in the set, and Calyx being these new characters which have apparently significance in the story. If you look at it from just a meta perspective, a god on a plane where the gods are simply manifestations of belief managed to create from nothing a planeswalker who then subsequently did actually planeswalk to a different plane where the gods have no influence, which was a big part of the storyline last time, was how the gods knew that their power was only confined to their own plane, and that made them jealous of planeswalkers.
Yeah.
What?
It's bizarre, right? So now your own creation is ascended beyond you. I mean, Clothis is interesting in that regard because obviously I think we've got a little bit more of a hint from her recently with what's their name from? We got a hint of a Kaldheim planeswalker, the non-binary planeswalker who also is from Theros, another person who challenged their fate. Now, that's funny enough. We got more information about Clothis from a planeswalker from Kaldheim a year later in terms of timing for a set than we did about her from her own set. Now that is again blows my mind, and I really hope what it means is that because there was a difficulty in having to, pull the rug on the storyline and then having to fumble everything together with some Lord slides, it was obviously always going to be a bit of a mess. What I hope is that it sets it up to have some real deep metaphysical lore between the Titans and the gods when we go back. That's the only thing that I feel like kind of comes good from this, is that they know that it probably fell flat. I mean, the one thing that Wizards has done very, very well this year is respond to feedback, whether it's vacuously or done it in a way that's actually heartfelt and sincere. Is they're very good at responding to feedback, and I think most Vorthosians or most people kind of did speak about Theros feeling a bit flat, and I think they'll address that when they go back.
Sure. Nico Aris is the Kaldheim non-binary planeswalker. One of the, I mean, this isn't going to be something that I don't think we'll talk about in depth because Kaldheim is 2021, but definitely a triumph for this year, having at the tail end of the year characters, which, as you say, seem to be if not a response, because these design things take longer than a year, I think, as we sort of always talk about, if it looks like they've done something immediately, it's probably because they've actually been doing it for a while. It's just, production is a lot slower than the zeitgeist,
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, one of the big triumphs that will be in 2021 is a greater representation in the characters that are the face cards of the game, as it were. But this is funny. So Theros is kind of like our case study for what went wrong this year with the flavor. And it is definitely a hangover from the 2019 debacle that was the War of the Spark culmination. But it does go beyond the Theros stuff, right? And it's funny because, to kind of jump ahead, one of my flavor wins this year will be the return of web fiction. And again, this is something that probably during the time of Theros and Ikoria, they knew they were going to be doing web fiction for Zendikar. At least I assume so, because I don't think I would like to think that they took longer to write than, say, like a month, those kind of short stories. Well, they might have done. But the kind of the dissonance between what we were seeing on the cards and the story did carry on into Ikoria with the Django Wexler book.
Yeah,
and
I've got this written down here as well. That I feel like by the end of it, when we got to Zendikar, we got positivity, but there was a journey to get to there.
Sure, and Django Wexler is no slouch. Like, again, this isn't an issue of the writer, unless WotC can lay down proof that they gave Wexler notes and he just went nope and just kind of like completely ignored them or whatever. Like, this is definitely an issue which WotC needs to address, and even with the advent of return of web fiction, might be something they need to address still further, because again, there are still issues, and it's the cognitive dissonance between what's on the cards and what is in the story, even to the thing of like what color the Ozolith is. And this is to kind of be specific about it, if people haven't read The Sundered Bond, in the book it describes the Ozolith as being this large orange crystal. On
right.
the card, it's a large blue crystal.
I feel like the crystals in general, they never really decided, because in the trailer they were green. I know that the one of the triumphs, I know that different triumphs have different coloured ones, but yeah, you've got to have some consistency somewhere. There's only so much artistic representation that can happen when it's like, no, dude, like, you got to dictate these things to your artists and your storytellers. Like, you're the one world building, like, build the world so people can race story.
The journey of like certain characters as well just got completely like skewed. Like the Lucas storyline on the cards, he was someone who was wrongfully thrown out of Dranith and then formed a bond with a monster, and then came back and was like, yeah, bonders are actually the way forwards. In the book, he was someone who, yes, wrongfully got chucked out of his city, then formed an unwilling bond with a monster, and then went on to abuse and basically coerce monsters in a fascist totalitarian dictatorship manner to go and destroy the city in an effort to like rebuild it. Like, it's just the stories are completely different on the cards or in the story.
Screw you fans that liked Luca based on his card.
Oh yeah, so many people were like, "Oh, Luca and his pet tiger," and then the Sundered Bond came out, and it was like, "Oh no, Luca and his pet tiger, Luca, what are you doing?"
Right. Those are the things you don't want. You don't want from a multimedia format, is that you don't want there to be this difference, as you say this word, this dissonance. There shouldn't be this. There should be cohesion in your storytelling across the cards and across your novels.
Maybe that is the issue, like they are looking in the future to doing more multimedia projects. This year, something that kind of went under the radar, because it's not something that you or I engage in. And in fact, I don't think it's something that many of the hardcore paper players engage in. That might be a sweeping generalization. I don't know. And I don't know because it's so under the radar, at least in the UK, is the fact that this year they've also released quite a few like mobile games and non-arena digital games. There's been a few, there's been 2 or 3 where they've been like, it's the Magic IP stapled onto a completely different sort of game system. So they are looking to be multimedia based. There's the ever delayed and sort of secretive Chandra Nalar Netflix TV show.
It's just never going to happen. It's never going to happen. They cancel their comic books, they'll eventually cancel this. I mean, that's just me being realistic. I think that they might struggle to translate everything up onto the big screen. If they struggle so much in representing the character in written words and having to make apologies and fake apologies and regional apologies, I don't know, that might be, or unless the statement they made at the end of this year was kind of with that in mind, which I hope to do.
But it's I think, the big sort of takeaway, it was the struggle to have their IP go across multiple formats. They wanted to do the push with the ebooks, away from the web fiction so that I think they could start moving back into an area which they'd already done but hadn't been successful in. They realised the story and the narrative were very important, hence why the build-up and the expectation for War of the Spark was so great at the end of 2019. The fact then that they were like, right, we're going to hit home on this. We're actually going to make like Magic the Gathering literature something that's available in bookstores for people that don't necessarily play the game. Here we go. We're going to do all these ebooks, and the move into multimedia, and maybe the pull back and the foot off the gas trying to do this TV show and doing all these other games, I think is as a result of them realizing that the player base is still the main draw for this game, as it should be, because it's a game and we're players. So if we're the ones that are unhappy going, look, your storyline and your cards are now completely out of sync because you're spreading yourself too thin, seemingly, then I think this is maybe the larger issue. Maybe the kind of small issue, or Theros didn't feel like I had a story, Ikoria's story didn't match up with the cards. These are actually just symptoms of the larger thing of this year, WotC failed to put enough resources into being a multimedia company as opposed to a card game that happens to have a Saturday morning cartoon TV show. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not the 80s anymore. You can't just do that.
This is a direct, I think, symptom of the fact that they do, as they need to make this push to generate, I think it was 3 times the profit they made last year in the game to make up for other failings within the company. And this is where company ethics and company priorities kind of do affect the game on every level, from a story point of view to the cards they're printing. I reckon a lot of the reason why there's so many banned cards is because there is a push to make the powerful cards, make the formats exciting, ban if you need to, rather than saying, maybe the player base needs a lukewarm set that everything brings everything. Like, even ostensibly, like Eldraine looked like it was a power down set, and if you look at it, it's not in any way, shape, or form. No. They had to ban Lucky Clover, for fuck's sake. Like, it's crazy. And that was supposed to be like a nice like step down in power level. And clearly, it's not something they can do effectively. I think Theros was probably actually the only set in the year that did a good job of not inundating any format with something too horrifically broken. Underworld Breach being maybe the no, but graveyard effects. Uro as well, but I mean, Uro wasn't necessarily multi-format dependent. That was more that was the Oko of the set, and I feel like that's the problem, is they're going to always push to make things that little bit too powerful and then bring it back by banning it, then underpowering it, and then trying to find ways in the next set to elevate that. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's hard and it's tough, I get it, but there is obviously signs that there is a push to for certain aspects of the game to be more. I mean, I think it's the same way in the way that arena playing and playing in paper can feel very different. There are certain effects and everything they say they won't put on cards because it won't translate well to arena. Now, that's to me a big no-no, because I know that they need to push sales in towards arena. But if you're kind of changing your design philosophy based on a digital format of the game when it's a card game, that's when I feel like the issue is rising. And maybe that's where these cards like Oko and Uro and something like Scoot Swarm, Escape to Worlds, these kinds of effects that are cumulatively powerful, and that's the issue, especially when you've got other games like Hearthstone to compare it to. The more those comparisons start to happen, which they will in digital forms, the more our cardboard paper game will be affected, I think.
Sure.
But that's, so in general, fine. Theros, maybe just try next time to hold true to form, or I don't know, be more transparent about the fact that you took the story out. Don't know.
Yeah,
tough.
We'll see. I mean, 2021 will be a new year. I'm kind of hopeful that they're going to sort of hit these narrative beats a bit better, especially with some of the good stuff that we saw at the end of the year. All right, so that was our supposedly 1/3 bad stuff, and we're at the sort of 40-minute mark, I think. Yeah, well, there we go. What are for you some of the things that like you've come out of this year thinking, do you know what, actually, it's not all doom and gloom. Magic as a game is still holding its head high as being one of the best, if not the best game that's ever been created. Like, what's been a flavor win for you?
Oh, this is gonna hot take Secret Lairs. This is in a broader sense, though. What my title is: the power of extended or flexible art direction. Now we've seen how many Secret Lairs do you think we've had since its inception?
I'm going to go for 30.
Yeah, like you're 28, 29, including the
really?
Fools one, and that's not, and And that's me culminating all of the different constellation ones in together as one instead of 5 individual ones. With those 5 individual ones, it's like 33 or 34, whatever. The reason I say this is between Secret Lair art styles and Showcase art styles, both things that have happened towards the end of 2019 but have had a full year of expansion and exploration this year. Oh my good god, the difference if you can hold up 3 or 4 different magic cards now that look like they're from completely different planets, like they're from completely different IPs, different cards, everything about them is diverse, and I think this is fantastic because the way that they started doing Secret Lairs, pushing the envelope for art styles, then allowed them to integrate it into sets proper. Obviously Eldraine was the first set to do this with, and I think is still probably the best way of them doing it so far, but it allowed them to do things like the comic book style with Ikoria. It's allowing them to do these cool kind of stone architectural based ones in Kaldheim going forwards. Even the Hedron effect, like the Hedron explorative effect that they had for Zendikar Rising. I think all of these things make the game feel more dynamic visually and aesthetically, and I think that's really important for a game not to stagnate. I know they've done a lot of border upgrades across the years. We even recently had one with a little holographic, and the way they took out the colouring at the bottom, controversially maybe to some. But these are the kinds of things that keep the game feeling diverse. And as long as they do it within a story reasoning, and this is why I think the Showcase is a great example of this, compared to say maybe to some of the Secret Lairs. I know we were talking about the Mana Rocks, for example, of if you push a direction so far, it will stop feeling like a magic card. Cool, fine, fair enough. But if you can integrate these art styles into Showcase frames, into ways that make it feel like it's part of that specific plane, not just part of Magic, but from that plane, that is a really good way of breaking that line between storytelling and functionality. And I think this year has been a really, really good example of that. If you bring up multiple different Secret Lair products and different showcases, they look like they're from radically different games, but they all still fit within this Magic aesthetics. I think they've done a very good job of diversifying that homogenized art style that we talked about last year with Vorthos Mike.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. My win for this, one of my big wins, is the art direction as well, but almost for the other end of the spectrum reason. Not to say that like I disagree with your point. I completely 100% agree with your point, but I think the art direction for this year of Magic has just done so much in terms of bringing this game up to a new level, because Magic has been one of the most visually interesting games ever since its inception. And you know, you can look at like the 90s Magic cards and the sort of early 2000s Magic cards and sort of sniff and turn your nose up at some of the art styles, but the kind of way it's captured people's imaginations is still something that holds true even with those older cards. So Magic has never looked like bad, quote unquote. It's never been an ugly looking game, and some games out there have looked very ugly, and some card games have lived and died on the fact that their aesthetic didn't quite work, and Magic's never had that issue. But there's just something about the art this year, and it is to do with the diversity, but I don't necessarily think it's just to do with something like the Secret Lairs. There's something about this year where it's just been pumped up to a new level. And I think the Secret Lairs have opened the door to the company realizing that, yes, there's merit in having slightly different art styles and maybe pushing the art styles as far as they can go. But it's also within the idea that some of these different treatments of cards and cards that are already staples have opened up the door to having Magic look like a new game within itself. So what I mean by that is that yes, you can have things like the Secret Lairs where, you know, they staple another IP onto it. Like, I mean, this isn't a good thing, this is a terrible thing, but say like the Walking Dead ones, for example, where you know, they don't look like Magic cards, they look like promo shots for the Walking Dead. And they did things like the charity products like of a few years ago, things like the My Little Pony and the Transformers ones that they did for Hasbro. We staple these different IPs on them, and they look like fantasy realism versions of those IPs. But you don't need to do that to make Magic look like a sort of a new, fresh take on Magic. And the thing that I didn't actually think about this over the past couple few days when we thought about what our highs and lows were going to be. It was actually only this morning that it kind of dawned on me that if I was to give someone a set of cards to be like, look how much Magic has leveled up this year in terms of its art style, it wouldn't necessarily be the amazing constellation treatments that were in Theros. It wouldn't necessarily be the fantastic comic book anime styles of Ikoria, or it wouldn't be the, all the different showcases or all the different like new art treatments, or even just the standard art treatments of like within sets of people being able to give a little bit more room, like the Wiley Beckett's, or the fact that Tyler Jacobson has had an amazing year this year doing like really deep sort of saturated colors in his Zendikar artworks and stuff like that. If there was one set that I had to be like, look how far Magic has come, it would be Double Masters.
Mm-hmm.
Double Masters, the box topper alternate artworks that they did were phenomenal, and I still don't think they get half as much recognition that they should do for the game, because people just went, oh, okay, they're box toppers, they're alternate arts, because I think a lot of people, and I don't mean this as a diss on anyone, or were a bit spoiled by the fact that this year they've taken the Japanese Walkers, Throne of Eldraine showcases, and they've applied it like ad hoc to every set they can. And even in things like Zendikar Rising, we didn't just have the showcases of the travel posters. We also had the expeditions like border with all the like Hedron borders for all the different like fetch lands, whatever that they did. But Double Masters, just they took cards that were iconic and had artwork that was iconic. And Cynthia Shepherd was the art director for Double Masters. I don't know. I can't confirm whether she was also the art director for those box toppers, because sometimes they split it up. But I'm just going to, for argument's sake, let's say it was Cynthia Shepherd. They were able to give the artists enough legroom to be like, here are these iconic cards with already iconic looks. Do what you need to do to them. And not a single one of them. I looked over the list today, and I think maybe at the time I said there was a couple of duds, but looking back on them with kind of like fresh eyes, not a single one of those Double Masters artworks is a dud for me. Every single one of them brings something new and fresh and makes the card look absolutely fantastic. And not only, and this is my point when it comes to things like Secret Layers, not only are they doing this, but they're doing it without any kind of gimmick. They're doing it without any kind of theme or IP stapled on top. They're not doing dogs, or like they're not making it look like, Adventure Time, or they're not going, oh, this is Walking Dead. They're doing it within the context of them looking like they're from the world of Magic. If you look at the Carl Critchlow Wormcoil engine, for example, that can't look like anything else except for Magic the Gathering, and it's so amazing and yet so different to the classic Raymond Swanland artwork that we already have for Wormcoil Engine. 2 artworks that we already have for Wormcoil Engine from him. If you look at the Wayne Reynolds Blightsteel Colossus, can't be any game except for Magic, and yet it looks so fresh and different to the Chris Aran one. If you look at the Scott Fisher Force of Will, well, we've had several arts for Force of Will. 2 of them are from Therese Nilsson, so obviously that was a point of contention already where people wanted an updated artwork. But the Scott M. Fisher Force of Will is just phenomenal for a card that already has several iconic artworks, and yet it still looks like Magic the Gathering. And I just don't know if there's any better example about how this game has managed to keep reinventing itself and still look like the world that it inhabits. It's blown me away. And for me, I think if we're going to pull back like we just did with Theros and being like, well, Theros' story was the issue that we're unhappy with, but really it's an issue at large with telling a story across multiple medias. And if we're going to zone in on like being like the artwork, this, like, I think Double Masters is for me the pinnacle of Magic art for this year and is one of the flavor highs and doesn't get enough credit for what it is. But if we pull back, the artwork for 2020 Magic the Gathering, I can't think of a better year. Magic
I don't think you can. Yeah, it's little things again, like the Chromox Exploration. Look at these cards. I mean, the Cultivate.
M21. It's not even the Double Masters. Like M21 had Storm Simulacrum, it had Cultivate, Scavenging Ooze.
Honestly, some of the cards this year are like you can salivate over them. I think they've done an amazing job of art style diversification that feels integrated. I think this is why I know it's not technically 2020, but I feel like this informed a lot of 2020 decisions. Is that the way they managed to integrate such overtly different style with the adventure showcases, but still make them feel like Magic cards when they kind of have no right to, because it's got 2 text boxes at the bottom. The frame's completely different. The art styles are completely different. If you can pull that off, then I feel like that was kind of what gave them the freedom to then do everything else they did this year, and they didn't hold themselves back on pushing the envelope. Again, it's much better to make everyone take a step back and kind of go, oh, wait, maybe I don't like this, because they've then taken a step back and they're looking looking at it properly, because that will usually pull people in, then have everything just feel kind of wishy-washy and everyone kind of go, I mean, yeah, I suppose. I mean, the biggest example for me for this is I'm looking at a sheet that has all 40 of the box toppers open, and the thing that stands out to me most of all, obviously, is Jason Mindsculpt, because it's the only one that doesn't have a new artwork. And the fact that
That's true.
the fact it's so obvious out of all of those this is what shows that they do create and they cultivate artistic environments with these sets. This isn't just an individual card basis. You've got to think about this, as you say, from an artistic direction point of view, that they've created this set as a whole. A really good example of this is when Magani Villeneuve did the Golgari direction for
Allegiance.
Allegiance. I couldn't think of the word allegiance for some reason.
Guilds of
that was a really,
no, sorry, Guilds of Ravnica, because that was I did Golgari in that pre-release.
It's the fact they're able to have this kind of this in like this kind of feeling where it encapsulates the whole set as a whole within these diverse art styles. I think that's really, really important. I think it has been a fantastic year, and it's elevated each of the sets. I feel like arguably this is another reason why Theros felt flat, because the Constellation effect is maybe one of the ones that didn't have the same kind of heightened effects. Maybe they should have done all the escape cards, kind of focus on that side of it, so the Constellation side, when they did also the Secret Lair constellations. Maybe that was a down point.
Because they've attached the idea is that they've attached the showcases to whatever the new mechanic is. So you're right. So in Eldraine, it was the adventure sorcery, the adventure spell cards, which had the two sides of the card. In Zendikar, it was the landfall cards. They were the ones, regardless of their rarity or whatever, they were the ones that then got the showcase treatment. But you're right for Mutate for Ikoria, and then Theros. They went, we'll do like the god creature type cards or the god demigod cards, which isn't a bad thing. It's just interesting that they with that one, it's almost like they went, it was like a top down thing. So in the other ones, it's like, we have this new mechanic, okay, what card we'll just make the rule that the new mechanic is the one we give the showcase to. Okay, that's fair enough, and they go off and do that. And for Theros, it was top down. It was like, we want to use these constellation artworks for gods. Okay, is gods mechanic? Not really, but some of the cards will be gods and demigods. Okay, well, we'll do it for that one then. It was kind of a weird reversal.
And it shouldn't be that way around, I think. No, don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't like them, but I think it's why maybe it resonates slightly less. And maybe that's why I felt they fell, is because adventure cards in the showcase showed off Eldraine in its specificity, whereas yes, okay, Constellation is specific to, like, Nyx is very specific to Theros, and the basic land's a really good example of how they can do that. How can they create basics that feel like they're from that plane? But if the focus was supposed to be on this underworld, this escaping aspect, that should have been the focus. Instead, the focus all seemed to be on this demigod kind of side of things, which was the least explored in all of the stories. So that's I think that's exactly the point, that lack of cohesion between the story they're trying to tell on the cards and the story they're able to tell out in external formats. And I think that's maybe again where it fell short. Whereas something like Double Masters, there isn't a story to carry apart from each card kind of carry its own weight and its own integrity, which they did a fantastic job of. This is why things like Darksteel Colossus look so Blightsteel looks so good. Stoneforge, for example, looks so good. All of the swords have been lapped up by a lot of our play group because they're iconic representations of iconic cards. And the fact they're able to do that all justice was very impressive.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The swords are an interesting one, because one of the sort of criticisms, I suppose, of the sword cycle for the Double Masters box toppers was that they weren't the Chris Ran like illustrated ones. Like, Chris, that's such an iconic cycle of artworks for all those cards. People kind of thought, oh, well, really those are the ones you want. But as great as the Chris Ran ones are, you can't deny that the Double Masters box topper ones didn't tell a narrative story for each one of those individual swords. And I think for all of those cards, like the Fatal Push, for example, is another one where the narrative story on that box topper art way outstrips maybe the playability of the card, or even, some people, that was a card that for some people, we discussed at the time, kind of thought, well, the art style is a bit weird. It's a very specific art, like, for that card. We're not quite sure what it's trying to tell or what it's trying to do. But for those people in the know of, like, the Kaladesh story, or maybe people who kind of picked up on the visual signifiers, that was definitely a narrative over design choice for that artwork. And I think that's great. This is also, it's weird, we touched on it a little bit just now, this has been kind of the year for basic lands as well. As far as like interesting things going on. Like, I mean, in Zendikar we obviously got the full arts, which Zendikar is what Zendikar does, but we also had the constellation lands in Theros, the full art constellation lands, which, I mean, polarizing again. People could say that that's a year loss rather than a year win. But
On the
also, if you
energy
look at
cards,
the energy cards, well, oh God, it's so unfair. They're not
I know.
well,
See, that's the thing. I say it jokingly because I'd actually I like the fact they did something different, and I quite like that trigger in my head that crosses the IPs together. I don't mind that so much. I guess it might shake some people up the wrong way, but yeah, whatever.
yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm just looking up the artist for them. Oh yeah, Sam Burley. Yeah, poor Sam Burley. Did an amazing job, and yeah, people still compare them to the Pokemon cards. But not just the Theros lands, but also if you look at the M21 lands, M21, as much as it's a core set, and core sets are a weird one, right? Because people really loved the fact that core sets came back, and yet actually as a set, people seem so nonplussed by core sets. But when they're not there, people go nuts. So it's
I know,
kind
it's
of
weird.
weird. It's a lose-lose situation. But M21 this year was one of the most flavorful core sets that's ever existed.
Yep.
They doubled down on the cats, dogs tribes. They doubled down on Teferi, it being a Teferi set. So they had like Teferi bloody everything and a million different artworks for the Teferi cards. But they also gave the other 4 planeswalkers in the set their own special showcases and their showcase frames, which then also went onto the basic lands. Like, it's crazy. Like, M21, just in a microcosm, you could talk for hours about how they pushed the envelope and I think really leveled up what a core set can be. I mean, yeah, and that's 2020 as well. Like, this is it. This is what I mean about 2020 being the year that Magic didn't necessarily, like, Magic wasn't in a bad place art-wise, but this is the year that I think they really grabbed the bull by the horns and, like, rode it to wherever it wanted to go. And yeah, it's been an absolute win. Like, you just can't dispute it. I just don't see how you can dispute it unless you're a hardcore old school Magic fan, which there are plenty out there. Like 2020 has been the best year for art collectively than any other year the game's existed.
So this is something really low key that we've never talked about that I don't think we'd like to talk about very often, is that they even did remaster versions of certain cards in Magic the Gathering, Magic Arena. So they did like an Amonkhet remastering of where they did new artwork for cards like Wrath of God. I think they used the artwork that was after the Invocation. Things like that. The fact that they're willing to do art updates and things like that in Magic Arena is also really important because for some people it's the only way that they play. And it's the only way for these artworks to get like more circulation, probably easier circulation because it's easier to take the digital product and move it across than it is to do it on, printing out thousands upon thousands of cards. But it's that kind of thing that they're willing to pay care and attention to all of these different like art factors is what I'm going to call it, different things that they have to consider, because they have a choice with every single set to go, do we do this, do we do this, do we do this, and they've seem to have said yes for most of the questions that came up, and not and I don't know who it is that's in charge of doing that or why they've done that, but I cannot complain. Yeah, as you say, it's been an undisputed triumph for the year for Magic Art, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, let's move on to some of our other flavor highs. I know what your big one's going to be, so I'm just going to jump in with a small one just before you dive into it. And one of my things, just to kind of flip side what we were talking about earlier with the story being the thing that we kind of feel was an issue. One of the big issues was the storyline not being up to snuff. Is the flip side of that with the return of web fiction as of Zendikar Rising. What a decision. Like, what a decision almost out of nowhere as well. Like, it's kind of easy to forget, even after just one round of web fiction, that the decision, at least for the public, to know that they're doing web fiction, to it being published and then being sort of like capped off, was like the space of like, what, a week? People went, the web fiction's returning, 2 days later, the web fiction was up. And then they released the stories like pretty regularly, like 2 stories a week for about 2 to 3 weeks. Mad, absolutely crazy that's, they went from the start of the year, which we say of it being like, what the hell are you doing with the Magic story? You're either not doing it at all, or you were giving it to us in a way which is almost like we have to have 2 different alternate universes for the same story, to it being, oh no, here's the web fiction that you like have been craving. And not only did they bring it back, but to their credit, as we said at the time, because this is very recent that we spoke about this, they tried to push the envelope even then. They didn't just do, here's some online web fiction. They gave us the sort of the new format of there being a main set of story and a side set of story with different writers taking on different responsibilities across those 2 sort of tracks. Yeah, crazy. Like, I mean, now that you've got a bit of distance from it, like, what are your thoughts and feelings on the web fiction?
It's funny because I have this written down as kind of the end of we got so caught up in the negativity of Theros, I forgot to finish on the highlight. That was that the fact they managed to come and finish off the year with something that's like that, that's so much more encouraging than starting off the year lacking story, because it kind of makes you feel like, okay, good, going into next year, this is the direction they're likely to take with things. Not only are they going to give us the perspective of the Planeswalkers, which obviously they should do, because I think that as much as the Gatewatch got a lot of kickback, I think that did drive the story in a really confident and positive fashion. As much as I didn't like the things that happened within the story of Battle for Zendikar, I feel the way that the story was presented was great, and that's the kind of almost like the standard they should be doing it as. The only thing I will say is it kind of felt like, when like dad forgets your birthday and so makes up for it by giving you something way more than you were supposed to get for your birthday a week later. That they gave us both storylines at the same time might have been their way of going, well, we really want to give this to the audience, let's go. And they didn't necessarily stop and think, oh, okay, we could probably drip it in a little bit more and give them time to absorb it a little bit more. Good example of this is Spice 8 Rack not being able to keep up with the number of articles that were released a week because he was trying to do feedback on them, and it was a good showing and a good indication of how I love that they've done like almost like a 180 on it. I feel like now that they've seen that 180 work, take your time with it. Don't overindulge it. Don't overdo it. But at the same time, don't stop. Please, for the love of God, don't stop. I'd rather be inundated with than anything else. And I feel like the reaction that they got from the audience was universally positive. Again, doing both main story characters as well as showing a world building aspect with Akiri, Zareth, and a few of the other stories that kind of showed what happened outside of the main story arc, I think is very important with creating diversity across a plane and giving us something that we want to get our teeth into, giving us more. We don't mind you leaving questions open. Just don't give us half an answer and then never explain what the question was before it. This is why certain things don't work. Give us answers, give us vague answers if you want to, because then our minds can go with the rest of it. But just give us a decent question and follow it up properly, which is exactly what I feel like they did with Zendikar Rising. They could have easily fluffed that up, and they didn't.
I think it's interesting. I think they have to have a real think about how they want to move forward with what different mediums they put the story into, because if you look at something like the ebooks that they did, the story in them, if you kind of divorce them slightly from the cards, the stories in them were good Magic the Gathering stories set in the Magic the Gathering universe. It's certainly a lot more coherent and a lot more relevant than some of the older Magic novels where, the characterizations of certain, characters that were the faces of the game, like Jace and Gideon, for example, really didn't match up with what the rest of the game was talking about. Like, those aren't necessarily the issues that we're talking about with these ebooks in terms of the characterization of people. I mean, obviously the Ikoria one was pretty egregious with how different it was, like from the artwork on the cards. But the Eldraine book, for example, was a really good Kenrith story. Like, you got a feeling for who these characters were on the cards. We didn't necessarily have them before. So I wonder if moving forwards with the web fiction, if the web fiction maybe sits in the space where it's very grounded and the web fiction is what connects itself to the set. So if you want the story of Kaldheim, if you want the story of Strixhaven as it's told on the cards, that's what they use the web fiction for. But then if they want to still do these ebooks, they can do these like one-off stories where maybe like the Kenriths are the people who drive the ebooks. Or maybe once in a while, we'll have a Davriel Kane ebook, or we'll have an Akiri Lineslinger ebook, where it's just like a story on Zendikar. So like how we used to have those one-shots in the web fiction, which weren't attached to a set. It was just this year in the story article, we're going to go back to Ravnica and we're going to see what Taser Karlov's doing. Maybe that's what we use the ebooks for. So you can do a little novella where it's like 300, 350 pages, but they're not necessarily having to tie themselves down to what's represented on the cards, because that's what the problem is the fact that the cards don't match up with the story. So I kind of wonder what they're going to go back to. I just think it's a massive flavor win that they've decided to go like, actually, the people who read these narratives are the people who play the game. It's not divorced. They are connected, and it does matter. So we're going to make it accessible. We're going to put it back on the website where we advertise our game. We're also going to have these story articles, and we're going to have a greater sense of like connectivity. I mean, for me, just because it was when I was really seriously getting into the storyline as something that I took as seriously as the game. For me, the kind of golden age of linking up the story with the cards was pretty much like Kaladesh Amonkhet and Ixalan, where they really started to strive. And then obviously the Shadows of Innistrad stories were over as well. But that whole kind of era, sort of Tark era, like Magic Origins onwards, really, I suppose, is where they really sort of like doubled down on the fact that the narrative was important. And so I think they need to get back to that. And this doing the web fiction is definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, the difficult thing with that, I guess, is that if you look at it subjectively, that all those stories were kind of in the build-up to the War of the Spark, and they maybe had an extended universe of continuity that allowed that story to build better, and they might not have that opportunity going forwards. I mean, this is one of the things that I think we probably sit on the same side of, is that we'd rather have stories that span multiple set arcs if you plan them in advance. If you do like the Kevin Feige thing with like they did with the MCU, of where you create an extended universe and everything happens within it, instead of kind of going, oh, and then adding on to the end, adding on to the end, adding on to the end. With all of these, we've still got a few different threads up in the air, like the Phyrexians, maybe not the Chainveil anymore, the Raven Man, but these are the kinds of things that if you build into this extended universe effectively and then kind of get the story beats going up to them, that's going to deliver way more than having each set have an individual what's the word I'm looking for, when it's like enclosed of itself, like standalone. Each standalone story might not deliver so well, but then the thing is, then that's fine because that's in isolation. Because even if, like, say, if the Son of Bond fell short, or if, for example, the Theros Beyond Death book, had they released it, fell short, that's in isolation. That's not too bad if you don't do this big extended one. So I guess it's interesting to see going forward which of these they're likely to do. Are they going to do another sweeping arc, where they have this building story, which they might do with Karametra, not Karametra, Strixhaven Lass. What's the woman from Strixhaven? God damn it.
Casmina.
Good God! Right, so this is another problem with Magic, because too many names are similar. But yeah, I would, in general, I think they've done a fantastic job of tie it close to the sets and keep it, as you say, relevant to the cards.
Also, really good writing finds in A.T. Greenblatt and Miguel Lopez, especially, who are two of the four writers that were on.
That probably had a lot to do with it as well, as they were both very, like, the way they delivered the stories felt very true to Magic storytelling, whereas some of the other writing we've had, especially from external writers, doesn't feel like the way the characters would speak. Obviously, this is nitpicking significantly, because everyone wants their character to be written a specific way, but that is something to be said for sure.
Yeah. Give me Nikki Drayden. Get Nikki Drayden back, man. I'm desperate for it. I really loved her writing.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully we do see her again. I'm not sure if we will, but hopefully we do.
We'll see. All right, cool. That was my little jump in then. Go on then. I know what your big flavour win of the year is, and it is a big one. Why don't you take us through it?
So mine's, as to quote Gavin Verhey, the year of Commander. Now, looking in retrospect, was it a success or not? I think it was a fantastic success. What I've written is it's a fantastic focus on unfocusing the format. Now, what do I mean by this? What I mean by this is that the number of new legends that have been released over the last year, the different support that we've seen across colours, has created, in my opinion, a greater diversity in the format than most years that I've been playing. I feel like they did a fantastic job of, because an issue that Wizards has sometimes is when they focus on a format, like we say Modern Masters, they can kind of break it a little bit. And weirdly enough, touch wood, we've still got, testing to go forwards with, but I don't feel like in a year's worth of product kind of designed and pushed towards a Commander format, they haven't broken it. I mean,
that's interesting.
CEDH, questionable, but I mean, CEDH is a whole different beast anyway. But there's nothing egregious, and that's surprising to me. That is shocking to me. Like, if everything,
it's interesting. I think in the same breath, because I agree. Like, I think I would say Commander Legends would be if I was to pick something in the year of Commander to be a flavor win, Commander Legends specifically. But it's interesting across the whole year, from the Ikoria Commander decks onwards, if you like, there are some pushes where they've designed it for Commander, and actually it's not great. There are certain cards, like the free spell cycle from the Ikoria precons. Right, some of those are a bit like, but then they were designed at the relatively same time as Commander Legends. And Commander Legends has been in development for years and years, in fact, according to many people who've worked on it. And weirdly, from certain cards have been designed from Commander, maybe they're going to mess up this format to Commander Legends, where people were worried it was going to be the Modern Horizons issue, but it was actually the complete opposite, where they put in a bunch of really wonky, interesting mechanics made for Commander, but not made just to make Commander egregiously more powerful. I think you're right. It's been a crazy old year for the year of Commander. It's been uneven, but I think a net win for sure.
Yeah, so I think even that free spell cycle, the reason I don't mind that so much is because that line that says if you control a commander, the whole point of the set is supposed to be based around commanders and not making cards like, Prosh, or say back in the day Rafik, the boogeymen of the format, say things like Breya or Merrin. Like there hasn't been like a new. I mean, there's probably a massive oversight that I'm having here in my head, but there hasn't been like a new boogeyman of the format that everyone's had to go like, oh no, Narset's taking extra turns of back and forth. Like even something like Obeka, like no one's actually thinking, oh, that's egregious. I mean, yes, okay, she could do some egregious things, but this is very different. Say something like, okay, fair enough, negative side, something like say Tulane or Corvold. They haven't seemed to done after the brawl, and we'll put that down to that being the brawl format and the brawl format being wonky. But they haven't actually had that many more of those kinds of errors in, as you say, the Legends set. And I feel like that's definitely something to write home about, because it's a very difficult format to keep exciting without pushing the envelope to the point of it slipping.
Yeah, there's been a few cards individually that, from a gameplay perspective, has threatened it. Like in the Ikoria precons, it was Calamax and Xyrus were both two commanders that people were like, oh, these might be a bit too much, but then actually proved to be relatively okay, the both of them in their own way. The Jeweled Lotus from Commander Legends, as soon as that was spoiled, everyone threw their toys out the pram. But weirdly, if we're talking from a flavor perspective, Jeweled Lotus is amazing. The fact that they've been able to do a commander-specific Black Lotus card with incredible artwork by Elena Dana, no less. That card, if you look outside of a gameplay perspective, really just highlighted why Commander Legends was such a huge win, because they were able to do these callbacks to the flavor of old, especially with all the legends that, did callbacks to older characters, or maybe if they weren't the characters themselves, hinted at to older storylines, whatever, or to planes which people wanted to see again. And were able to introduce them in new ways that didn't, as you say, completely bust the format open from a gameplay perspective. I just don't know how you can think of Commander Legends, or the Year of Commander really in general, as anything but an absolute win. And there are people who are detracting it from from a commercial standpoint. It was a bit of a full-on marketing strategy that kind of rinsed every one of their wallets, and obviously massively unfortunate timing that 2020 is also the year that the world went into a pandemic lockdown, and it's the one format which you need to have multiple players for. Of course, like things like the OEDH has softened that, but not everyone has access to it, so it has been tricky from that aspect. But from a leveling up of the game's aesthetic and the game's creative and narrative drive, like, it's been an absolute boon.
Yeah, so three things I was going to say from Legends specifically is they managed to make partners that didn't break the original partners, and the diversity of decks that I've seen because of this is incredible. The fact they did etched foilings on all of the old favourites, so even your old decks that you're like, oh, do I take it apart because you've got all this new spice and all this new stuff? Now you get a new etched foiling for your Legend. Spruce it up, carry on going. That's amazing. The fact that Boros, I played a 4-way Boros game the other day with 4 different Boros decks, and yes, okay, my deck was Azurda the Dawnwaker, so it was very equipment heavy. But the fact we were able to play a 4-way Boros game and it felt like a normal game of Commander, like we had a Belborka deck in there that was doing interesting exiling things, and like the fact that they managed to diversify White and Boros as archetypes specifically, because they were the ones that are highlighted as being quite stunted, that is also a fantastic win. The fact that they did a Commander collection that, yes, okay, financially you might consider it money grabbish depending on what country you're from. I think availability and price points obviously vary depending on where you're from, but for me personally, it was a much needed way for me to get a Sylvan Library into my hands. Thank you. It was almost like a gift from God direct to my brain.
Well, also we spoke about this in last week's episode. This brings us right up to this end of the year. Like, narratively and creatively speaking, that Commander collection was a complete success. Monetarily and commercially speaking, your mileage will vary very widely and justifiably, but from hey, look at this weird new artwork and these deep narrative pools that we're putting onto Commander staples, like, yeah, fuck yeah, it was great. I can't see how you can think it wasn't from that angle, Yeah.
And then to tie the whole episode together, one of the things that I noticed is that things like showcases and secret layers, these aren't for your grinders. These aren't the tournament grinders that are probably putting in hours to get to Platinum on Arena before they go off to do their in-person format. Obviously, you can't do it this year. But showcase cards and secret layers, they're for the pimpers. And who are pimpers? Usually they're going to be your commander players. So not only do you have a diversity of different archetypes, things like monarchy getting more support and everything, but now your card types within your decks, like the staples, the cards, things like solemn, like cultivate, you get to pimp these up like a motherfucker. Like if you're a whale out there and you love this format, you've had an absolute year, because you're not only getting amazing products, these all cool box toppers, you've also got products specifically made for your format. You've got cards like, say, Navarino, if you want to be that douchey Staxy player, or you've got things like Rebecca if you want to go crazy and on a new combo format. And yet again, these all fit within the same. Like they made mana burn a thing again, Andy, man. Like,
yeah, they did. Yeah.
It's just everything about that focus. I think the threat going into the year was, are they going to ruin the format? And halfway through the year with Ikoria coming out, you were like, maybe they are, because we've still got Legends to come out, we've still got all this to come out, and then Legends have come out and it's completely satisfied my. Again, this is a year that started for me with having a lot of trepidation, and it's ended with a lot of confidence going into next year.
Sure.
I would normally think of, say, a Harry Potter theme kind of set, some eventually getting Kaldheim, not seeing Phyrexia, all of these things. I was like, how do I feel about all it? And now I'm like, bring it on. I don't think you can do no wrong. The only thing I will stand by saying is that maybe we need to slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, maybe there are too many Scroll Racks and Vampiric Tutors in the format now. I mean, that beyond those kind of slight things, I don't think you can get away with, because as long as you keep pouring more into the format, there will obviously be points of it will overspill at some point, unless you create some holes at the bottom. So yeah, I think that's an inevitability. But for the whole, I think the format is super healthy now. It is, as you say, in a year that's really difficult because you can't play the format in the way that it was supposed to be played. People have risen above it because the Wizards have made cards that make people fight against the adversity, get a webcam, meet up with people, push to play these cards. If they did a flat year for Commander, I reckon the format could have not died out, but it would have definitely had a depression, because people were like, well, I haven't got any cards to be excited about. I don't have the opportunity to play without putting a massive amount of effort into it. Do I bother? Or instead, I've played more Magic in the last week than I probably have in the last 2 years.
Sure. I got a Vampiric Tutor and a Skull Rack in the same box.
Yeah, well, maybe that's where my anger comes from, because I got Seraphic Greatsword and Phyrexian Triniform, so good for me.
I don't think Scroll Rack's all that, doing a completely different episode.
Wanderer. It is a Maelstrom Wanderer. And
I don't know. I had it in a Belb deck just to play it, because I built a Belb deck out of the Commander Legends box that I had, and I've now moved it into Xyris to get a bit more card filtering, I suppose. I've been locked out on the same 4 cards on top of my deck more times than I haven't been, though.
Yeah, well, that's like first game. It's like, this is what Scroll Rack lock feels like. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the best feeling
Great.
in the world.
Pay 1 mana to see the same 4 cards again.
Okay, good. Hey, at least it's only 1 mana. That's
true.
Yeah, cool. Misery, fantastic, good.
Vampiric Tutor is very, very nice. All right, well, what's been this is nothing to do with Magic, really. This is to do with our podcast. This is essentially, this will be the last episode of the year, and the first episode of next year will be our 1 year sort of birthday, if you like. What's been your high this year doing this show? We are at almost exactly a year old. I mean, we've done 53 episodes, which is technically more than one a week, because we did a few records at the end of 2019. Like, what's been your flavor high, or even just your high doing this podcast over the past year?
I think it's been about, like, it's going to sound super wet, but the community integration is massive. I mean, I'm going to be transparent here. You are way better at this than I am in terms of integrating yourself, involving yourself with other people, communicating. But even the few interviews that we've done, and the little amount that I engage with in terms of social media and the community as a whole is phenomenal. Like, I think this has been a really good year in terms of everyone could have fell flat, or they could have pulled together. And doing this show has been a fantastic example of how, especially the Magic community, and I think this is actually across most, like, quote unquote nerdy things like gaming, like speedrunning, that kind of thing. The community aspect of it is so tight knit and so supportive, and it's been great to kind of integrate myself slowly but surely into that. Having skirted and peered and looked at it from afar for almost a decade, it's quite nice to, as I say, dip the toes in. And I think that's been a fantastic...
Yeah, for sure. I think I'd have to say that as well. Like, obviously speaking to individual members of the community in our interview episodes, and having more of a sort of a tailored eye to the game, I suppose, is in heightening my own understanding of what I love and what I like about this game is definitely a high. It's the community aspect. It's getting to know people not only from around the world, but even other people within the UK who we might not have been able to get to know better. Like Total MTG, Matt from Total MTG, for example, is someone who's been really supportive and a great friend to our podcast. And we don't even necessarily deal in the same content, whether it like format or content wise, but just as a fellow Magic player and someone who's kind of just into being part of the Magic community. And, you know, Zuby across the pond and everyone else that we've integrated with have been absolutely fantastic. I mean, my biggest thing has been able just to get to chat to you every week. I know, I mean, this is going to sound the wettest of all. Like, in a year where I think you and I have seen each other maybe a handful of times physically, and, you know, we've been friends for over a decade now, and, you know, I've seen you less in the flesh this year than I have at any other time of us knowing together. And yet being able to talk to you every week pretty much on the dot about a game that we both love has been an absolute joy, and God knows a huge help to my mental well-being over the course of this year. So yeah. I would say that's been my highlight of the year.
Well, cheers, buddy. Appreciate it.
No worries.
In terms of specifics, there is, I could say the highlight of my year happened this last year, and that was I bought the Secret Lair Void Slime, the Slime Prime Time Grime one, and the first and only use I've had of it so far is to counter the ultimate of a Teferi Master of Time activation, which I will say right now, guys, and this is one of the things the reason I end on it is because if you are finding yourself, especially going into the new year, this might be more of this. If you are umming and ahhing about whether or not this is something you want to be doing, please try to, if you are feeling that you can't play enough, try to get a webcam. Try to find some fashion of getting yourself integrated into playing with other people on spell table, whatever format, because it is such a huge boon to your daily life to have that little something to look forward to. As Andy just said now, this little interaction, this continuation of what can feel like normal. And I think it's really important for mental health to have these things. It's very easy to sit and spend each day going, oh, I don't get to play. Find a way to do so in whatever way you can, because it will make everything feel a little bit less challenging, and it will make you feel a little less stress, and it will give you a little bit more enjoyment enjoying your life. What's better than stopping a Teferi Ultimate with a Void Slime? Okay?
Agree. I think, yeah, if I was to I 100% agree with that. Yeah, spell table has definitely been a massive boon, and like good luck to the peeps who made spell table and run it, because God, they've had a hell of a year. I suppose if I had to pick like one physical like card in my collection that I'm like, yeah, that's my flavor pick of the year in terms of artwork or just whatever else, and there's so many to pick from. I do have a full art Wayne Reynolds Blightsteel Colossus that he very kindly signed for me, because some artists, if you mail them your cards with different stipulations on things like pricing and times, time frames and all this kind of thing, some artists do sign cards for fans. And after we had our conversation with him, I did tell him that I actually purchased one of the full art versions of his Blightsteel. And he very kindly said for me to send up to him and he'd sign it. So I do have a signed Wayne Reynolds Blightsteel Colossus that had a little first written in the corner, like 1ST. And I messaged him being like, hi, Wayne, thank you very much for the card. What does this mean? And he went, well, that's the very first Blightsteel that I've ever signed. Because there's no like fests or there's no expos going on where they would usually sign hundreds of a card a day. There's none of that going on. So the only chance they're getting to sign cards is when people send them to them. So I have a first edition Wayne Reynolds signed Blightsteel, which I'm pretty stoked about. That made my several months, if not has not made the year. So yeah, thanks Wayne if you're listening. It's definitely the most treasured card in my collection for sure. Well, guys, that's going to do us for our yearly roundup. What were your flavor highs and lows of the year? You can let us know by hooking us up on Twitter at mtflavouring. We're on there every day. Nathan very kindly said that it's me doing a lot of the Twitters, which is true, but Nathan is also on there flexing his Boros wins like he was the other day. If you want to chat to us on Twitter, we are always up for conversations. One of our listeners has recently started a thread with us talking about soundscapes of the multiverse, for example, where we've been chatting about what different instruments or musical styles or kind of periods of music you would find on different planes. It's been a really interesting conversation.
So much more intelligent conversation than we would typically engage in. So,
for sure. Usually I do polls about like, which plane has the best beer to drink, and then this guy came along and was like, oh yeah, which plane do you think would have the best orchestral music? And I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to brush up.
That's an actual thing to.
Yeah. That's an actual subject. I play music. Like I play like several like woodwind instruments and stringed instruments. I can read music, and even that I was just like, oh my lord, I have to like actually research stuff now. So yeah, it was definitely a higher conversation than I was expecting. But yeah, go check it out there. Emails go to it doesn't. Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. I just remembered our email.
Stumble in, stumble out. I love it. This is good.
I mean, I've only said it 53 times this year. It's fine. My personal Twitter is @AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
@TheFoxInTheMoon.
And yeah, I guess that all that remains to say, guys, because I think we've said more than enough for the year of 2020, is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you next year.